Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Philosophy Hour of Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we continue our exploration of the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre by looking at his concept of vertigo and what it tells us about the nature of freedom. One of the most famous sections in Sartre's Being and Nothingness is his commentary over the moment of vertigo, dramatized so perfectly with the image of a person on the edge of a cliffside looking down to his death below or his continued life above. One of the easiest, shortest sections of his work, the moment of vertigo is really about the realization of the totality of one's freedom and the realization of the fragility of that freedom. Sartre, as we noted in our longer lecture on Being and Nothingness, was a metaphysical libertarian. One should never conflate and confuse metaphysical libertarianism in philosophy with libertarianism in politics. A metaphysical libertarian is someone who affirms free will while denying all forms of determinism. The world is not determined by the laws of motion and physics. The world is not determined by biology or nature. The world is not predestined to hell or salvation. To reject all forms of determinism while affirming the centrality of free will is what metaphysical libertarianism is about, and Sartre was a metaphysical libertarian. The world was, for Sartre, in a state of total and complete flux, and its only determination is through our choices we make, and at any given moment, by any given choice, the world could come out differently because of our actions. The world is nothing. I am nothing. And the only creation that comes from this nothingness, as we explained in our longer lecture, is through our choices. And this is why the individual, in Sartrean existentialism, must constantly choose to be and become whatever he or she desires in a given moment. And the choice must be perpetual. You can never succumb to not choosing. One must always be in a state of creative choosing. The real importance of Sartre's reflection on vertigo is how our choices are entirely related to the fragility of freedom. It is not necessarily the case that one recognizes the fragility of freedom in the dramatized case recounted by Sartre, though being in that position, being on the cliffside, danger of death below or life above doesn't hurt. One can recognize the fragility of freedom in less dramatic moments, but Sartre chooses this image because it represents the clearest moment of truth and realization on the part of a subject person. The vertigo, which is sort of a eureka moment where one understands the reality of existence, is what it truly means to be human, to understand that in my existence in this world, intertwined with the fragility of existence, my freedom is found. That Sartre intertwines freedom with both life and death in this image is important for us to recognize. In man's total freedom, he can hurl himself off the cliff's edge and to his death. He has the freedom to do so. Conversely, as part of the dialectic of life, death, or suicide, he can climb back to the safety offered away from the cliff's edge and continue to live. He has the freedom to do so. The maximalization of freedom for Sartre is found in man's ability to choose life or to also choose death. The choice of death, however bad or tragic it might be, must be respected because it is the freedom of a subject consciousness to choose death. In this sense, Sartre doesn't stray far from Jean Locke in associating the choice of negation as a real expression of man's freedom. And in this sense, Sartre does stray very far from his companion and former friend Albert Camus, who argued that suicide is no appropriate response to the nihilism of our existence. The extreme freedom of negation is the negation of one's own being, the choosing of death. The choice to end one's own freedom is, paradoxically, a form of freedom. What Sartre is illustrating for us is that the choice to die is, in fact, a choice made freely. It is part of what being a free being is. We generally associate freedom with life. We would say, for most of us, the only freedom is to climb upward and to continue to have life. Because in continuing my life, I am continuing my existence in my perpetual choices. For instance, I will go back to my work as a waiter, and then after a little while I decide to choose to be an artist, and then I choose to be a journalist, etc., etc., and I am constantly choosing with the life I have to create a new freedom for myself. All of that is, of course, stripped away from me in the moment of death. But what Sartre is trying to tell us in this image, in this moment of vertigo, the choice of death is also a choice of freedom. Because in that extreme freedom, in the fragility of freedom, I have chosen death. And that choice, that creative choice, is the truest expression of freedom, and therefore must be respected. Critics of Sartre argue that Sartre embraced the nihilistic strand of Romanticism and existentialism precisely because he associated the freedom to choose death as a good in of itself, needing to be respected. This is reminiscent of many of the great romantic tales of the 19th century, in which the ultimate expression of love and freedom was found in death. One can think especially of the life-death philosophy, the Lebenstod, of German Romanticism, as one of the quintessential examples of this embrace of death as a manifestation of good. Now, Sartre certainly did not think suicide was an apt response to our condition. Nevertheless, unlike Nietzsche, unlike Camus, and unlike St. Augustine long before him, Sartre does not condemn the choice of suicide or the choice of death as something, quote-unquote, bad. He leaves room for that choice as an expression of our freedom. And again, that is why it must be respected. So what is vertigo for Sartre? Vertigo is the realization of the totality of our freedom, and in that realization, we also recognize the fragility of our freedom. Freedom is always on the precipice. Our choice can lead to continued life, or it can lead to death and destruction. At any second, I can choose freely to end my own existence. I have the absolute freedom to do so if I wanted. And that is what makes the moment of vertigo so unhinging, so fragile. I recognize that the myth of freedom is not this wonderful story of progress, of Whiggism, of progressive movement towards perfection, but that my freedom can end at any moment, and I do have complete control over my life, and I can end it in a moment's notice if I freely choose to do so. Freedom, paradoxically for Sartre, and this is what Vertigo is telling us, includes the freedom to end my freedom